It's pretty frustrating being a My Hero Academia fan right now with how polarizing this series seems to have become to most people. I mean, despite amazing manga sales, the outlook on the series now compared to when it first hit the scene has been dropping, and the general consensus seems to have gone from it having the potential to becoming the next great thing to just being okay. And while it's definitely got its flaws, this is just wild to me considering all the things that this series does so well, and especially with the recently concluded war arc, Horikoshi's true talents as an author are finally starting to really show themselves now with how everything in his story seems to be coming together. So, I'm going to be the change that I want to see in the world and argue why I still believe this title has the potential to be one of the greatest to ever do it. Now, I'll be covering events from both the anime and the manga, so if you're not caught up on this series, here's your spoiler warning. Otherwise, let's get into it. What started out as this happy, sunshiny story with a black and white, heroes good, villains bad approach to its themes, with its colorful art style and extravagant and, dare I say, even campy character designs, has now seemingly morphed into this dark, nuanced, and morally ambiguous, even deconstructionist take on shonen and the broader hero genres as a whole. The obligatory fight scenes and epic moments are all still here, but they're far from being the focus of this series. And as it's been stated before, this isn't really a combat-driven story like many of its contemporaries, but rather a character-driven one, not unlike Hunter x Hunter and Madoka Magica. And Horikoshi is relying on our knowledge of these typical shonen tropes to go beyond the generic power fantasy to say something meaningful about society and the concept of heroes as a whole. Starting off, ever so slowly over the course of this story, Horikoshi has been drip-feeding us little bits of information about the world of My Hero Academia with a very clear intent. In the very beginning of this series, we're introduced to the world from our protagonist Midoriya's perspective. As the narrator of this series, he's the one who informs us that this is a hero society, where the good guys clean the streets of crime just like they do in the comics. It's also here that we actually get to meet the young Midoriya in the flesh, a quirkless, scrawny hero fanboy. It's clear that through framing the series in this way, we're meant to identify with his perspective as the kid just wanting to be like the heroes he worships and sees on TV. Chances are, he's just like a lot of us viewers in this sense, who likely grew up watching shows like Power Rangers and Dragon Ball Z, praying for the day that we'd go Super Saiyan or get our letters of acceptance from Hogwarts. Things go a step further for Midoriya though, who see these larger-than-life figures not just through the lens of fantasy, but as part of his reality. And save for not having a quirk of his own, hero life could have easily been within his reach, the way that it is for all of his peers. And it's exactly why we, who've also had to face the reality that being Goku isn't a viable career option, feel for him when he finds out that he'll never develop any special abilities. As we follow his story though, we continue to learn more about this hero society he's introduced us to, and about the smaller details that keep things moving smoothly, like how hero work takes place in a practical sense as a function of society. It's even in the name. It's not referred to as heroism, but actually as a form of labor. Hero work. Essentially, when you strip away all the capes, tights, and tighty-whities, this is just a job like any other in public security and is treated as such. Based on the hero work that's performed, you get paid out in equal measure. This seems like simple world building, but it also adds a level of complexity to our heroes themselves by adding to their motivations, something I'll examine more in depth later on. Heroes ultimately want to save people, but they also often have secondary motives like carrying on a family legacy or wanting to earn enough money to relieve financial stress and so on. And these other motivating factors can sometimes conflict with their heroic identity. In addition to how heroes are compensated, however, we also learn about things like hero rankings, indicating to us that there are fame and popularity aspects involved too, further nuancing what this world categorizes as a hero. Of course, these popularity contests help in boosting morale within the country and act as an incentive for heroes to continually do their best, but as a result, the heroes are constantly forced to keep up appearances when situations sour, often in ways that end up being detrimental for everyone in the long term. But the thing that raises the writing in this series to new heights isn't just in the world building, and it definitely isn't in the relatability of the main character. It's how Horikoshi paces this subtle world building perfectly to complement an entirely different character's growth, and by doing so, is able to complicate this title's seemingly black and white themes while exploring what the dangers of having such a naive worldview can have on the world at large. You see, shortly after we meet Midoriya and get his perspective, we meet our antagonist Shigaraki in the League of Villains, giving us our first true glimpse at the underbelly of My Hero Academia society as they attack UA School. And at first glance, what we see here is honestly just a typical clash of shonen tropes. The villains attack, they underestimate the heroes seem to win until the villains gain the upper hand, and then when all hope seems lost, you get it. You've seen this before. I mean, we even got that Team Rocket's blasting off again star thing at the end of All Might's fight with the Nomu. Like I said, this is all just classic shonen fare, but as we see later on throughout this series, villains tend to be a lot more cunning than this. At least the ones that actually pose a real threat. This is done to highlight Shigaraki's childlike outlook on the world. I mean, he even refers to this attack as a game. Basically, similarly to how Midoriya's outlook can be seen to represent the audience's perception of the typical hero, I'd argue that as we meet him, Shigaraki can also be seen as a stand-in for the audience's perception of the typical villain. Straightforward in both thought and motive, he reminds me a lot of the bad guys from most of the hero shows I saw as a kid. He has shallow, short-term goals that really don't seem very well thought out beyond.
It's fun to do bad things.
Things begin to shift though after he meets Stain. The first character to present a valid criticism of the hero society itself, he agonizes over how society's muddied the waters of what a true hero should be. He disagrees with both the paid labor aspects of it as well as the popularity. Two things that we've already addressed that, despite being well-intentioned, can affect the motivations of heroes, causing them to act in ways that aren't always in everyone's best interest. See, unlike Shigaraki, Stain does what he does for a purpose. He's insane, absolutely, but that ends up being the thing that makes him interesting as a character. That, and he has a point. He's on a mission to try to cleanse the world as twisted as his motives are. He also explains that this adherence to a conviction like his is what separates, quote, the strong from the weak. And he also gives us a hint at Shigaraki's potential for growth. At this point in the story, Shigaraki is still pretty childish, so when he essentially gets schooled here by his bad guy senpai and has his Nomu attack completely overshadowed by him and his message, he realizes that he needs to go back to the drawing board. As society reels from the impact of Stain and his ideologies, Shigaraki begins to reflect on himself and his place in the world in light of recent events, and as a result, completely overhauls his approach from top to bottom. This time when he attacks, it won't just be an indiscriminate assault. Instead, he aims to kidnap and corrupt a UA student to add a further crack in society's trust in heroes with a smaller squad of trusted and especially gifted villains, each of which align with Shigaraki because of the unrest caused by Stain's story and message, which he actively uses to gain their strength. This is a huge, noticeable improvement to both his methods and planning skills. And despite ultimately failing their mission and even losing their master and a few allies, things still end up in their favor as their actions ultimately lead to All Might's retirement. As you can imagine, this really turns the hero world upside down as they struggle to cope with the loss of their symbol of peace as he's replaced with a new #1 hero who, doesn't quite come close to meeting the standard. Now, remember what I said about heroes with complex personalities and motivations? Endeavor is the entire embodiment of how this aspect of hero society can backfire on itself, further straining the already shaken trust the public has in the heroes. And we can basically taste the public's unrest immediately as the media and common citizens alike struggle to ease their anxieties over the recent events, and honestly, I would be too. Endeavor seems to have ever only had one motivation to being a hero: surpassing All Might. This is pretty obvious to most everyone who sees him, from his family members he's traumatized to his obsessions, all the way down to the average Joe. So the thought of this guy being the new symbol of peace is, well, understandably unsettling. Getting back to Shigaraki though, this new shakeup to the power balance on both ends of the hero-villain spectrum, and the public's general unrest after everything that's taken place up until now, brings out the long-forgotten Yakuza, who basically just show up to the league like,
yeah, baby!
the scene with a bang, as the villain with the most twisted plan and most brutal methods of anyone we've seen so far aside from All for One. He's got a team, a clear goal, and a meticulous plan to realize them. For the League, this sends a clear message. They're officially in the big leagues, and without their godfather backing them, they've got to earn their respect and their position in the world of villains. This becomes painfully obvious when Overhaul and the League interact, further highlighting how immature Shigaraki still is as he explains how they've repeatedly made rookie mistakes leading to their every defeat thus far, despite having expert guidance. This comes back to bite Overhaul in the end though, as Shigaraki learns valuable lessons in deception, patience, and long-term planning through their partnership, elevating him by the end of the arc to being, for the very first time in this series, a legitimately terrifying threat, at a time where he can potentially do the most damage to the status quo. And this terrifying trend just continues to grow and develop throughout this series. As the world descends into further and further uncertainty and public anxiety grows, Shigaraki also grows. Not in power per se, but more importantly, in maturity. He becomes more cunning and he continually hones his ideals and ambitions as he clashes with the Meta Liberation Army, the next villain squad to challenge Shigaraki's leadership. Yes, you heard me right, Army, which he later recruits by the way, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So far, this was my favorite arc of the story because of how much development went into the villains here, and especially Shigaraki, something that we don't really see that often in similar titles. It's here that we see our best worst boy fully awaken to his full potential during his fight with the leader of the MLA, Destro. As I said earlier, this showdown tests Shigaraki's ideals for his ultimate goal, and as he reclaims some family memories locked behind some childhood trauma, we finally get to see the payoff of Stain's remark way back in Season 1. Now, it'd be easy to assume otherwise, but Shigaraki doesn't just get a random power-up here. As Destro continues to challenge his vision for the future beyond his desires for destruction, something finally snaps within him. When Destro destroys the hands of the family members he's covered himself with until now, his suppressed memories of the countless traumas he'd experienced as a child by those very same hands finally resurfaces. It's revealed that as a result of the country's obsession with heroes, Shigaraki was faced with abuse and neglect for wanting to be a hero himself. Since his father was given up by All Might's predecessor to try to protect him, he developed a hatred for heroes and directed all of that hatred towards his son, while his family did little to step in. Eventually his quirk awakens, however, resulting in what is possibly the single darkest moment in this entire story. Now homeless, Shigaraki spends his days roaming the streets with passers-by ignoring him, believing that a hero will do something, highlighting just how deeply apathy is seeped into this culture, as acting in compassion is now essentially a job that regular people just don't feel entitled to do. This revelation causes the true destructive abilities of his quirk that he'd since kept suppressed to finally be released. Once again, Shigaraki is spurred forward in growth not by some sort of deus ex machina, but through surpassing his own mental hurdles and reflecting on the state of the world and his own place within it. And unlike Destro, who seeks to remake the world according to his desires, Shigaraki now becomes concrete in his own desires to simply destroy the world. Only now he can finally articulate that he wants to do so to fight back against the society that created him, concluding that a world like this doesn't need a future. Truly matching his decay quirk with the decay of society itself, Shigaraki's goal is to see everything in the world crumble away to nothingness for what it's done to him. And by this point, he's starting to sound like another villain. After his victory against Destro, he's rewarded by All For One's doctor, who finally acknowledges him as worthy now that he has matured and solidified his resolve, and prepares him to receive power deserving of his current status as the ruler of My Hero Academia's underworld. Now, unable to let him roam free any longer, the heroes desperately prepare over the course of a brief time skip to clash with Shigaraki and his army. And all that prep don't do nothing. Despite their planning and recruiting of the UA students in their operation, putting them under intensive training over the course of 3 months, and even employing Hawks as a mole to infiltrate the enemy, giving them that 3-month advantage in the first place, Shigaraki is still revealed, just as All For One predicted, as the symbol of evil for the world, in spectacular fashion. The parallels between Shigaraki and My Hero Academia society are culminated in this beautiful, yet chilling indictment of the hero culture as he clashes with the pros. He highlights how they, in their showboating and PR stunting, actively ignore and disenfranchise those they fail to protect. And that neglect of their responsibility is directly responsible for his existence. He refers to this as a decay and a rot within society. And on-the-nose comparisons aside, his words are pretty powerful, evoking a similar level of intimidation as Stain did way back in Hosu City. His issues with the state of the world are valid. By this point, it's become harder and harder to see the heroes as anything other than people just trying to fit a role. They're fallible, and such an over-reliance on their presence and work is what caused a person like Shigaraki to exist in the first place. All semblances of childishness gone, what we have in exchange is an extremely powerful, terribly calculating force of nature capable of making all of his desires into a new, terrifying reality. If you're a fan of My Hero Academia and would like to see a few more videos like this from me, hit me with a comment. Feel free to let me know what characters stuck out to you or what your favorite part of the story is. Anything that's on your mind. If you liked the video, why not consider giving it a like and subscribing? I know my uploads have been a bit erratic lately, but I should be able to transition to a much more steady release schedule soon. For now, all I have to say is thank you for watching. I'm really appreciative of everybody who takes the time out. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you next time. Peace.